Welcome, everyone. This is Linda, and I am so excited to introduce my guest today. And I have to tell you this funny story about how we first met. At the time, I was living in Pennsylvania, and Helen was living in Iowa. And I had a very good friend named Helen Arnold, and her and I always went to the AFP conferences together. And on the way to the conference, she was telling me, people keep getting me mixed up with this Helen Arnold. I wonder who she is. And so we go to the opening reception, and up walks Helen Arnold, the infamous and famous Helen Arnold. And so we became friends from that minute on. And then after I moved to the Las Vegas, Nevada area, I get a phone call one day from Helen saying, I'm moving to Las Vegas. So I said, well, here's when our AFP chapter meets, and I'll take you and introduce you. And now Helen is kind of the queen of AFP Las Vegas, I think. She's so involved in all the activities. But one of the things that Helen does a lot variety of nonprofit consulting. But one of the things I know she's really good at, and I thought it would be a really interesting topic, is talking about how to start a charitable organization. And many people think, oh, this is easy. I'll start a charity and everything will be fine and dandy. But they don't realize what's involved. So I'm going to introduce Helen. And if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, but mainly I want to start with what people need to think about when they want to start a nonprofit organization. So, Helen, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Linda. This is just a delight. I'm happy to be here. And I love talking about establishing new charities because it's so exciting to see everything that happens. Everybody that does this cares and they want to make a difference in the world. And I love that that's happening. The downside of it is there are 1.7 million nonprofits in the United States or charities in the United States today. That's a lot. And that's a lot out there vying for that charitable dollar. I have been in the philanthropic sector for 66 years. I have to think about it, 66 years as a volunteer, as staff, as a development director, and 25 years as a consultant. I've seen a lot of nonprofits come and go. I incorporated my first nonprofit, you're going to love this, in 1972. It was a long time ago. So we're going to go through this. What do you need to know in starting a charitable organization? The first thing is you need to know what problem you want to fix, what you want to address, what your passion is, what difference do you want to make? And having said that, look around your community. Is there any other organization that does that? Think about it. You don't want to be competing with them. I recommend strongly to my clients not to incorporate if it is going to be a complete duplication of services because the funding will not be there. Funders will not fund the same thing in two different organizations, and the competition can be pretty fierce. There are only so many dollars out there. So think about it and think about what you want to accomplish with it because that's your mission. Who are you going to serve? Where are you going to serve them? What are you going to do? What difference is it going to make? Think that through, please. Um, all the way through this process, shooting from the hip because you're excited is not a good business plan. It just doesn't work. And where do you get started? How do you think about this? Well, first you have to make a plan. Without a plan, you're going to plan to fail. We've all heard that phrase, and it couldn't be more true than in this situation. Um, what do you need to know before you start? You need a board. Start there. The first thing you need are people that are going to help you succeed. I can't tell you how many nonprofits start with boards of their relatives. My aunt, my uncle, my sister, my brother. That's okay if they're going to help you, but you need to think way beyond that. You need to talk to people. You need to see if they're interested. You see if they're willing to contribute time, talent, and treasure to the organization. Be honest with them. Don't avoid what you want them to do, because you're going to get a lot of really great support if you find the right people. So that's the first thing you need to do is come up with a really good board. Do you want me to keep just I can talk about this like forever?
Well, go right ahead because I think you're so right. And Helen and I were chatting a little bit before we did this session about both of us have encountered people that do exactly what you're saying not to do. They start without any kind of a plan in mind. They just have this great mission, and they might not realize that there are 12 other agencies in the community that are doing similar things. And even though you have a unique approach, is that going to be enough? And I think, starting with a board is absolutely critical, Helen. So maybe if you want to go on and talk a little bit more about that, but also I'm wondering, what kind of information do people need to do before the hard facts that they need to put together before they can start an organization?
Okay, well, the first thing you need to do is understand the system. Incorporating as a nonprofit is a state function. You would incorporate with the state you live in under the state laws of incorporating a charity. That does not automatically make you tax exempt for income tax purposes. For that, it's a second leg. You have to apply to the IRS to get your 501c3 or C4 or C6 or whatever you're going to do, depending on the kind of organization you are. Most are 501c3. If you're really bored and it's raining, you can read all 20 some pages of the instructions for the the federal process. But let's start with the state. You get the state incorporation completed. You get a filed stamped. It's usually electronic now. I don't know anybody who really does it by mail anymore. You have a date of incorporation. Remember that, and remember your state number. You will be assigned a number. But to incorporate in the state, you have to start with the IRS. This is like back and forth, and get your EIN, your employer identification number. You do that online. It takes about 7 minutes. It is not complicated. And you start there. You take that number, you go to the state, you incorporate as a nonprofit. You have your EIN, you have your state number, and you have your date of incorporation. That will become important later. So don't lose that. And then you'll have, in most states, I live in Nevada, so you get your articles of incorporation, the Nevada Articles of Incorporation. In this state, you also have to file a charitable solicitation statement. That's part of your incorporation. We'll go into that a little bit later, but that's no issue. That's no problem at all. You just some certifications that you are doing business legally and you're not doing things you shouldn't be doing. Um, uh, which is very important as a charity. Then you go back to the IRS to get your tax exempt status. And you're going to have to file a form. The form number is a 1023, 1023. Your 1023 is submitted to the IRS. If you are a standard, nothing unusual about your incorporation, you can do it online. So you file a 1023 easy. You would have to have a statement of purpose, your board with addresses, which you would also have had to have for your state registration, and a basic beginning budget. If you think you're going to make more than $50,000 and say so, you might flag the file and they might ask you to prove it. And there's no way to prove it till you do it. So just keep your budget under 50,000. That doesn't mean if you make more that it's an issue. It is not an issue. You can make 5 million, but when you're getting your 1023, keep it 50,000 or less in your budget total. And it's big general budget numbers. It isn't anything exotic. Then you have to, on that form, you have to certify that you have 4 documents. These are long form documents. They are legal documents. You will need an attorney or somebody who knows what they're doing to write it, or somebody who has, I have an attorney who writes them. It is the long form articles of incorporation, and all of these documents are signed by the secretary or president of the organization. The long form bylaws, and they can all be boilerplate. They don't have to be exotic or difficult. The consent resolution allowing all the officers to act, giving them legal permission to act. That's the document you will take to the bank to open your bank account. You can't open it without that. They won't do it for a nonprofit. And then the last one is a conflict of interest statement. The IRS requires that you have a conflict of interest statement. It's a long form. And I supply all that as a consultant. So you have to have all that, your board officers have to sign where appropriate, and then you're ready to go. You submit it online for the most part. If you are some kinds of foundations, if you have multiple, the last thing you have to have a physical presence, an actual office somewhere in the United States. If you are a foreign entity establishing a nonprofit, you would have to submit the long form, excuse me, in writing by mail. And that's a whole different ball of wax. But you do have to have a physical presence in the United States somewhere to incorporate as a U.S. charity. It can be anywhere, but you have to have it. Okay. Once you do all this and you get it submitted, it isn't, well, it's taken a little longer now. The last couple of years, from date of submission to date of approval online, I've been running about 8 days to approval. It used to be 18 months to 2 years. If you have to file the written form, the long form of the 1023 by mail, it can take weeks at least, if you're lucky. It takes a long time, and they come back and ask questions, want verification of things. That's the downside of that. Several kinds of foundations have to do that.
Wow. This sounds very complex. I hope we didn't scare everybody off to think I'll never start a nonprofit organization. But before you even submit it, how long does the process of just getting ready take? It sounds like there's a lot to do, and maybe you can kind of break down those steps again, that, excuse me, that they have to go through even to get ready to file, and how long does that usually take?
Depends on the client. If they have a problem getting their board together, it can take a year. If they don't have a problem, it can take a week. It just depends. It depends really on the client. My work is very quick. Um, uh, Literally, it takes me an hour to do the 1023 easy and submit it. That is no big deal. And then 8 days to, actually, my last one was 13 days, but that's after the big reduction in forces in the IRS, after the staff was cut. I have had a client that wanted to raise money for women in Afghanistan, which is fine because they need it. But I convinced her to incorporate as an American nonprofit first without saying that. And she had a mission statement that covered women, children, athletics, advocacy. She was trying to be everything to everybody, and it didn't work. Um, uh, it would have flagged the file. So we got online with somebody who does raise money in Afghanistan, and this is one of the things you have to be aware of. This whole process took a year, took a full year to get her to the date of submission and get all of her documents signed by everybody that was on her board because they were all over the place. But in Afghanistan, women can't open a bank account. And any money that goes to Afghanistan has to go through a clearing bank in New York. And then it has to go to a bank in Kabul. But the account has to be set up by a male straw man. And then you have to have permission by all the ministries to have the money dispersed in the country. And each of them takes their piece as it goes by. And and you would be flagged by the IRS and Homeland Security in the United States for doing it because it would look like you were funding the Taliban. But it took me a long time to convince her of that, to get her to think that through. So, but once she did, and it went really, really, really fast. The It's getting the documents signed, agreeing to the purpose statement, and getting everybody in agreement. Submission of the forms is just nothing after that, within a week.
But you've made it sound complex and yet in some ways easier. I'm kind of surprised, truthfully, knowing how many people have lost their jobs with the IRS, that they're getting through as quickly as you mentioned, that some of them have been approved even since the cutbacks. So can you explain again how the admissions are submitted and when it's good to do it by mail and when it's good to do it electronically?
Okay, well, if you do it electronically, the last thing you need well, you always need it, is an NTEE code, which tells the IRS what your tax classification is. There are hundreds of codes to choose from. The trick here is at the end of every list for education or medicine or athletics or whatever it's for, there's that category otherwise undefined, which means it isn't in any, that's the one you want to pick because everything else fits under that. And you don't want to tie yourself down too much.
Sounds like wise advice. It,
Yep.
it
It
sounds like this really can be very complex, but I think having someone like you that they can rely on to get expertise on how to make it as easy as possible is what everybody's looking for, probably.
right. And it's just a routine system. The Doing the long form, if you can avoid it, that's the best. But if your home base is in Germany, you would have to submit the long form because they would look at it harder and they would look at the financials of what you're doing much more in depth and ask questions. Um, but this lines you fill out in the long form are pretty much the same as the short form. It's just more detail.
And I guess the big question that probably a lot of people will have is how much is this going to cost? And how do you go about paying the fees? It sounds like you have fees to the state, to the IRS, and to someone, most likely someone to help you do this, because I don't think many people would be able to do this themselves unless they're an attorney. So talk a little bit about the fees and how that works.
Sure. Um, every state has their own fee structure. You'd have to set up an account with your state with your name because you're going to want to go in every year and file your annual reports anyway, which are going to have a fee connected with them. And you simply pay with a credit card. And every state has a different set of fees, and you just pick and choose. But you don't, if you're using a consultant, you really, really, really want to set up your state incorporation under your email. And that's one of the first things you should probably do is think about setting up an email account for the organization so you can use it for where everything can go. Most of my clients may not have their organization websites up yet, so they're a lot use Gmail to do that because it's easy to set up. And you want all the notifications going to the client as a consultant. I don't need their notifications. It's once this is all done, it's their process, not mine. When the IRS is a little more restricted, to pay a bill, You are required to set up an IRS .gov payment. I'm trying to remember the exact letters. Pay.gov. That's what it is. Pay.gov. I do pay the 1023 fees on that because it's silly to have a client do it. They'll never use it again. And then I just get reimbursed. The fees are not identical for the forms. The long form that you mail in is $600. The 1023 EZ is 275, and that's virtually 99% of the incorporations are the 1023 EZ or the charity registrations.
So if I get this right, the organizations that absolutely need to fill out the long form are organizations based outside the US. Is that correct?
Well, not always. Sometimes they're just complicated. If they're a private foundation, which is by definition solely has one sole funder, typically a family, they may have to file a long form. This is where you bring in your attorneys and ask them. I can't act as an attorney. I cannot act as a financial advisor. I don't have those accreditations. Um, it depends on the financial situation of whoever is incorporating. And if they're doing a specialty foundation, I have one client who has a private foundation that is funded entirely by a business. And but they do want to also um, uh, raise money from the general public. So they're trying to straddle both lines. So that's more complicated and needed the long form.
Okay, well, I hope you're not all too intimidated by this. If you have a strong mission, I think you should definitely contact Helen and get more detail on how to do this. But I have one really big question that may take up as much time as we've taken on the details of this is, and this probably is really the thing that I think you need to think about more than anything is once you are approved, assuming that you've completed all these forms and get approved by the IRS, what do you really need to do to get your organization up and running? It's not just having a piece of paper saying we're a charity. So, Helen, I'd like you to talk about some of your experiences, and I know you've had experiences with organizations that really haven't given enough thought to what they need to do to once they get the approval. So, can you talk
You
about
need a business plan, you need a development plan, you need a strategic plan. They're all similar but not identical. A nonprofit is a business. It should be run like a business. Nonprofit does not mean not profitable. So you have to remember that. Plan for all of the business stuff you have to do. And let me just sort of list those for you. You need to set up a website. You need to establish bank accounts. You need to make sure that the name you choose originally isn't taken by anybody else anywhere. You have to do that name search. This is all the sort of legal little details you have to think about. Um, the you have to realize that you're going to have costs associated with starting up with your website, with having an office, the printer, the computer. If you have a physical office, you could work out of your house, certainly. But if you have a physical office, the rent, the direct costs, your program costs. How are you going to raise money to do the programs you want to do? What are you going to start first? How are you going to do that? How are you going to hire staff? How are you going to set up payroll? How are you going to set up your organizational chart? You're going to have indirect costs. You're going to have secretaries or some kind of back office help. You're going to have to get a CRM, uh, um, a donor management software system, and that's going to cost money. You don't have to start out with the most expensive one. Start where you are. You're going to have to start doing some kind of public involvement. That could be a special event, which I don't recommend right away because it'll the volunteer hours will kill you. You need to find volunteers. You need to find entry level donors that are going to start giving to you so you have some cash flow. So you need to plan for all this. That's why you need that. The business plan is how much it's going to cost to set everything up and operate it. Your development plan is how you're going to raise money. And your strategic plan is where are you today? Where do you want to be in a year, 3 years, 5 years? Um, how do you see your nonprofit developing? How do you see it evolving into something bigger?
You know, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was a lot of times when people are getting ready to start a nonprofit and they know the IRS, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, they require 3 people to serve on your board. And a lot of people do go out and get their brother, their sister, their spouse, or whatever. Um, and 3 people does not make a board. I think we all know that, but a lot of people think, well, that's all I have to do is just get 3 names and sign on the dotted line, and that's it. But can you tell us about how important it is to really think about who's going to serve on your board and what their roles would be?
Absolutely. And that's why you also do the planning process that will identify the skill sets you need. Doing the relatives in the beginning is okay to get it open and get it running. But while you're waiting for your approval and while you're doing all this, you need to be out getting a bigger board, a minimum of 10, 15 if you can get it. And it sounds overwhelming, but if you start having coffee with people, talking to them, going to networking opportunities in your community, that could be the chamber, that could be um, and then at least in Las Vegas, there are like 6 chambers in Las Vegas. Go to each one of them. Rotary clubs. Start reaching out and talking to people about what you're doing. Start spreading the word because that's how you're going to start generating excitement and generating information that you want to get out and why you're doing this. And the important part is what difference it's going to make. And you're offering people an opportunity to make a difference in their lives. And do something good for somebody else. That feels good. That makes lives longer. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. But you need to sit down and know where you're headed because you'll never know if you succeed if you don't do that.
That's great information. I think people really need to understand what's involved so that it's not just, oh, well, all we have to do is send this into the IRS. We got our approval, and now we're going to raise lots and lots of money. But you have to think about how you're going to do that and how you build your board. Um, Without naming names, of course, but could you give us some examples of what some of the biggest mistakes you've seen people make when they try to start a nonprofit? I think it's always wise to learn from other people's mistakes.
Well, I have had one client who was very excited and the purpose was great. And when it came down to doing the business end of it, what I call the back office, the website, what it's going to cost to run the business. She shut down. She called me and said, "Undo everything you did. I don't want to do this anymore." No matter how much I talked to her, she couldn't hear me, and or didn't believe me or didn't understand. But she ran into a wall and she just got overwhelmed. So that nonprofit probably won't go anywhere. Um, and there are a lot of nonprofits out there like that. When I had a client that couldn't get people on their board, it just got smaller, smaller, smaller. They decided to close. And in your long form articles of incorporation, the IRS requires that you um, transfer any funds you still have left to another nonprofit that has a like kind mission. If you dissolve, that's what you have to do. And in fact, they had quite a lot of money in their foundation and dispersed it to community nonprofits that they had funded before. So those those nonprofits were happy, but the organization did dissolve simply because it couldn't get the volunteers to run it.
Yeah, I think those are the things that people really need to think about. On the other side of the spectrum, can you give us an example of an organization that really did everything right and went into this well prepared and maybe where
Yes,
they're at now?
I have a client who started in 2001. It's a free medical clinic, and they take no fees for services at all. They and no government grants. They do get grants, but not government grants. They were a break off from another free clinic that they just parted ways very amicably. It was a shock, and because that doesn't always work out that way. And when they started, uh, they did a feasibility study because they wanted to build a building, and the feasibility study came back that, and I did that as a consultant. No, the answer was no. The community would not support it. So they went back to the drawing board, and they looked around and went to a community center that had a big lot next to it. And they rent that lot for $100 a year, and they built their building with a common party wall with that community center that you can actually walk from one to the other. And they started out with about 3,200 unduplicated patient charts. And the first capital campaign was to build, after some cultivation and stewardship, a family foundation funded the entire building
Wow.
out of the community. So we did a campaign 1,000. And in 6 months, we stopped the campaign, which is pretty short for a major gift campaign, because we had already raised 1.2 million. And we didn't want to exhaust the community donors. It isn't that big a community. It's only, the general area is only maybe 200,000 people. And then we did a capital campaign for a dental clinic, a capital campaign for an eye clinic, and there was a third one I'm trying to remember, but all of them within 10 years. All of them got funded literally within months because it was such a good cause. There was no clinic that was doing what they were doing. And the cases they couldn't manage, they had a partnership with two hospitals, and the hospitals would take the patients that were more than the clinic could handle medically. They work with, they use about 600 volunteers a month. All their doctors are volunteers. They have one full-time paid, two full-time FTEs, two full-time paid staff members, and then two more FTEs, but it's like three people um, that are paid, but nobody else is paid. And today they have 50,000 unduplicated or close, 49,000 something unduplicated patient charts. That's a success story. That's a story. And it's been through different boards every year. They work together beautifully, and they make it work. There have been good years and bad years, and they get through, and it's and they built the building so that when there's a, a flood or a fire or something, people that are on need life support and oxygen and electricity. When the electricity's out, they can come to the clinic, and they have their own generator, massive, massive generator, and that keeps the electric on for people who need it.
That's wonderful. It's good to hear those success stories. Um, Before we wrap up, Helen, are there any other tips and tricks that you would suggest to people who really are thinking about a nonprofit? That just your final words of wisdom.
Well, it's, if you want to do it, I do it. I'm all for making a difference in the world. It is easier if you do it with support from other areas. So understand that you are going to be part of the nonprofit community where you live, and you all need to get along and help each other because that's what this industry does. Um, is it competitive? Yes, but it's also incredibly helpful to each other. All when the tide rises, all the boats float, and uh, just be careful to not run yourself ragged and please plan. Please make a plan. Otherwise, you're going to confuse activity for accomplishment. They are not the same thing. Work smart. Don't work long.
That's great advice. And I think, Helen, I really want to thank you for your time. Um, I've seen organizations, I don't do what Helen does as far as helping people incorporate as a nonprofit, but I've seen organizations jump into things that they just aren't ready for. And also sometimes there's no need for it in the community. I remember I was telling Helen I once had somebody call me because they wanted to start 4 nonprofit organizations. And I said, 4? I said, you realize you're going to have 4 boards of directors, 4 staff. I said, why don't you start one nonprofit and have 4 different programs? And the person was just amazed. Oh, I could do that. And so they get very ambitious. And like Helen, I agree that we love to see new nonprofits get started that are filling a need that's not being filled, but make sure that your need is really a need in the community. So Helen, I really want to thank you for your time. It's been great talking to you, and we'll see each other probably at the next AFP conference, if not
Looking
before.
forward to it. It's been a pleasure, Linda. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks.
That's it.